I'm joined on the Crispin Flintoff show by Paddy from Defend Our Juries. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, Crispin.
I looked on the news and I saw this story here. This is the BBC. Jury-free trials recommended to save courts from inverted commas collapse. And this is part of this story on the BBC. Our criminal justice system stands at a critical juncture, said Sir Brian Leveson, this is, who was requested to look into the matter in December last year. Challenged on BBC Breakfast whether the right to a jury trial in the UK was a basic right, Sir Brian said, "You say it's a basic right. Your right is your right to a fair trial. One of the consequences of the delay is victims, witnesses, and indeed defendants are kept waiting for years and years and can't move on with their lives. Something has got to be done to try and address that. If we don't do something very dramatic, these cases will get longer and longer delayed." Sir Brian added, "These are not small tweaks, but fundamental changes that will seek to make the system fit for the 21st century. The proposals would mean more cases will be heard in the magistrates' court, with jury trials reserved for the most serious cases." What do you make of this? How much of it is true about the courts are blocked up, they can't get through all these cases and etc.? What's your take on that?
Well, I've spent a lot of time in courts over the last few years, and they're right. I mean, the courts are kind of crumbling, and they are blocked up, and people turn up for their trials and are told to come back a year later. Then they turn up again, told to come back another year later. The tech doesn't work, people don't show up. It's a joke. But this is happening because of decades and decades of cuts from the government to the justice system. And all of these sort of recommendations that Leveson is recommending, none of them deal with that. And he's been told, make a bunch of recommendations that don't involve spending more money. And it's incredibly, incredibly dangerous, this idea that we can just cut out jury trials for all these sort of low-level cases. Um, at Defend Our Juries, for some time, we've recognized that juries are, they put the moral intuition of normal, ordinary people in this country into the heart of a criminal justice system. And they're kind of, a lot of the work we do around protest is, there's been a real attack, for the last, I would say, 5 years, a real concerted attack legally on protesters and their rights in the courtroom. We have defenses being removed. We have people standing in front of judges not being able to explain why they did a protest, not being able to talk about genocide in Gaza, not being able to talk about the climate crisis. And juries are just about the only thing we have left sometimes. The only chance you have often now, if you're in court for an issue of conscience, is to speak to those 12 people and just say, I, as a normal person, did what I did. Do you think I was right? And often juries find you not guilty. There's a sort of history over the last 5 years of juries actually saying, you know what, we don't buy this. We don't buy this crap from the government. We're going to find you not guilty. And I think it's pretty clear the government and the state and the courts want to stamp that out.
Defend Our Juries was set up before Leveson had even said that stuff. So were you aware that that was coming up? What can you tell people what it was that brought about the setting up of Defend Our Juries?
So Defend Our Juries, it came out of a series of trials that happened in a London Crown Court in 2023. And there was this judge called Judge Silas Reed, who was hearing a bunch of climate protesters, Insulate Britain activists in his courtroom. And over a period of weeks, over a period of hearing these trials, he started to restrict more and more what activists could say. And they wanted to talk about fuel poverty, the amount of people that die in their homes in this country because they can't afford to pay their heating bill. And they wanted to talk about the climate crisis, the millions, if not billions, of people that are going to die within this century because of the continued burning of fossil fuels. And this judge said, no, you can't talk about that. You can't say that to a jury. So then we have this, ridiculous situation where people are in court in front of a jury, but the judge is banning them from talking about why they're here, why they did what they did. And we have a few activists who say, you know what, we're not going to take this. We're going to disobey this judge. We're going to try and speak to the jury anyway. And Judge Silas Reed, you know, throws these people in prison for contempt of court, for saying the words fuel poverty, for saying the words climate crisis in his courtroom. And then there's this woman, Trudy Warner, a retired social worker who's watching in the public gallery that day as these people get thrown in prison. And she's just so angry at the injustice of it. So then, you know, the next week, there's another trial. And as the jury are going in, outside the courtroom, Trudy's standing with a sign that says, "Jurors, you have an absolute right to acquit a defendant based on your conscience." Now, that's not the first time that sign's been written. That sign's actually on a plaque in the Old Bailey. And it's sort of one of the oldest legal constitutional principles in this country. You know, it comes from 1670, from this Quaker case, Penn and Mead, who were sort of Quaker preachers who were, you know, arrested for preaching in London. They were found not guilty by a jury. A judge back then locked the jury up for 2 days and said, basically, I'm not letting you out of this room until you find these people guilty. And that jury refused. And then from that case, we get this principle: a jury has an absolute right to acquit based on their conscience. Whatever the law says, whatever the judge does to intimidate them, those 12 ordinary people can do what's right.
Wow. So this is the principle of jury equity. That's what it's called. What's going on at the moment is there's a lot of attention being paid to defend our juries because of what's happening with the Palestine Action prescription. A lot of what you were doing before was holding signs outside courts about the jury equity issue, and now you're putting signs up and they're being detained by the police. Can you tell us what the background to that is? And what would you like to say about that idea of holding the signs up and also informing the police that you were going to be there?
I'm sure people have seen the scenes and what happened last Saturday in Parliament Square. You know, we have an 83-year-old vicar, Reverend Sue Parfitt, carted into a police van. We have doctors, we have teachers, a former government lawyer, ordinary people carted into police vans in Britain for holding up a cardboard sign. They're upholding freedom of expression. And that's kind of always been our way at Defend Our Juries. We uphold the law. You know, we uphold the right to jury equity. And we're upholding democracy and upholding freedom of expression right now. And we told the Met Police that we're going to be there because we have nothing to be ashamed of. You know, we have nothing to hide, and we cannot turn a blind eye to what's going on in this country.
It's not about support for a group, is it? It's more the principle of free speech.
Exactly. You know, it's also about the genocide. You know, it's also about what is being enabled by our government. Because there is a long and honourable tradition of direct action and civil disobedience in this country. This is about democracy. This is about saying we will not give in to the corruption of law, the corruption of democracy, to serve the interests of the arms and the Israel lobby. 29 people, you know, sat down in Parliament Square and said, no, we will not comply with this.
Just thinking about this prescription of Palestine Action, the basis for the prescription could apply to other groups such as Just Stop Oil or Youth Demand and groups like that who are taking direct action on climate change. They haven't been prescribed yet. Do you think that in a way it's just setting the stage for those next organizations to be prescribed?
Yeah, we cannot let this be normalized. We can't. Because if this is allowed to pass, exactly, who's next? Climate groups, trade unions, racial justice groups. It would be a really, really dangerous thing if you know, it became normal for direct action groups to be to be declared terrorists.
Can you tell us about, for example, those lobbyists that are trying to stop juries being used?
Absolutely. So, there's this guy, Lord Wolney, who people might have heard of. He's a disgraced former Labour MP who had to resign after sexual misconduct allegations. But last year, he wrote this big report, and he was the government's independent advisor on political violence. I usually do the independent advisor bit in air quotations, because he's not independent. He was and remains a lobbyist for the oil and the arms industry. And he wrote this big report, and he recommended, something akin to the prescription of Palestine Action and Just Stop Oil. And he recommended that jury trials be limited in protest cases. And we've had Policy Exchange recommending the same thing. And we know that, that Policy Exchange have history of this. When Extinction Rebellion first came onto the scene in 2019, the year later, Policy Exchange, who are again this, dark, seedy think tank, they published this report, Extremism Rebellion, which recommended all these laws that then go into the Public Order Act in the next few years. And of course, it came out, Policy Exchange funded by the oil industry. Does the media report on that? No. So yeah, it's really, really dangerous. Our democracy and our law making in this country have been corrupted by these industries. And people need to take a stand against this. And that's what we're doing at Defend Our Juries.